and that's what got me involved in the Springwood Civic Centre upgrade and the $9.5 million commitment last election. That is the sort of thing that we obviously need to be looking at, but does fall very squarely in the purview of council. So yes, I keep talking to your councillors.
I'm happy to go next. I've spent quite a significant amount of time, apart from consulting with everybody locally in terms of what they would like. And Macquarie is a diverse electorate, and there's people with different views. There are some people that don't want a second airport, but of course there are many people in the business and tourism industry that would like to see a second airport in Western Sydney, would like to see it closer. I have consulted with the Sydney Airport Corporation to understand the facts, and I have looked, and I also have consulted on or spent some time with both departments that were responsible for the joint report recently about options for the second Sydney Airport and what potentially could happen, for example, with Richmond Air Base. And I also have consulted with the regional airlines and the RAF. So I've endeavoured to do my homework so I understand where everybody is at. It is a challenge politically to make a decision, but that's a responsibility of governments to do that. My understanding of the Sydney Airport is that given the changes and the restructuring and how they're going to redesign the airport, so that right now there's domestic on one side, international on the other. It means of a morning and of an evening, the international, apparently they're all housed on one side, so they have to cross the runways, and creates all kinds of havoc and timing challenges. They consider that they have enough capacity if they change the structure and design of the airport, and they're able to increase the number of flights, movements per hour, which I think is around 82 at present. They believe they can lift that up further. And if they do that, that they will be able to cope and increase the capacity. Now, that to the side, regional airlines have told me they don't want to make any more additional routes or add any additional routes while the economy is not growing in the way they'd like to see it growing. They'd like to, but at this point in time, they're not ready to. I personally think that there's some challenges.
I was at a briefing with Louise last week about the proposal to increase or to use Richmond RAAF base as domestic overflow. It's a terrible proposal for the Hawkesbury, and one of the things that I would really hate to see is for one end of the Macquarie electorate to be pitted against the other end of the Macquarie electorate, so that your tourism gains become the Hawkesbury's quality of life losses. Because this should be treated as a united electorate, not a set of winners and losers. On the issue of development, I think we have learned a lot of lessons in the Hawkesbury that can be translated to the Blue Mountains. We have similar problems with constraining development. For us, it's not bushfires and the national park. For us, it's flooding and the river. And what we're learning very rapidly is that uncontrolled sprawl, and I don't even know that you can call it urban sprawl once it gets out to an area like the Hawkesbury, but the uncontrolled sprawl that we've seen, that our council has allowed us and that the state government is happy to push further and further, has meant that residents are now spending up to an hour getting from Richmond to North Richmond. Now, if you've not travelled that recently, it's about 5 kilometres. That's a bloody long time to spend travelling a really short distance. You've got very similar problems to us. You've got a tyranny of distance, you've got heavily constrained areas, and you've got a lack of services. This is not the place to be pushing development out. You're already living on fingers. You're very, very vulnerable to fire. If you are going to take on more development, it has to be in town areas. We've also learned the lessons of the big ugly shopping centre that was supposed to rejuvenate Windsor. What it did was just add another nail to the coffin. So we have this lovely big river view. It's called, you can't see the bloody river because it's wall-to-wall brick.
Actually, Louise's office is just...
Yeah, it's wall-to-wall brick with a set of doors at the back where no one ever goes. And it sits there like a big pimple. And what it's done is pulled all the shops out of our main streets and down into the pimple, which is now festering like a boil. And it was a real backward step for Windsor. I hate to see the same thing happen up here. We know this doesn't work.
Yeah, we fought it up here.
Yeah, well, we fought it hard too. The trouble is we frequently find, that's why we're camping. That's why my voice is so awful, because I've been camping in Thompson Square to try to save that little bit of the Hawkesbury from the state government. So I think you have to be really careful what you wish for. We're really at a crossroads with a whole lot of this development stuff. We're definitely at a crossroads with the state government and the white paper. You need to dig in, but you also need to make sure that when you vote in the federal election, you vote for a party that's willing to fight to give, to maintain protections at a federal level and not hand those over to the states.
Thank you, Danielle. I think we're just about out of time. If there's any other quick question.
Firstly, I'd like to commend Blue Mountains Accommodation and Tourism Association, because I thought as I walked in, seeing the three candidates and the three posters resembling the three sisters was a shameless way of promoting destination. Fantastic. I'd just like to clarify that on behalf of the tourism industry, Blue Mountains Lieutenant Over on Tourism did write to the local federal member and Senator Doug Cameron as the New South Wales government representative to support, in the absence of any other federal government or state government special funding for the bicentenary, federal government funding or a commitment for a Blue Mountains Museum. And of course, a Blue Mountains Museum would complement the Blue Mountains Cultural Centre in that it would be a place to permanently showcase Indigenous culture, which doesn't exist, and the 6 language groups of the World Heritage Area have the longest ongoing connection to country of any people on earth. And that early colonial expansion, I hope that all politicians in federal parliament would acknowledge that it was one of the most significant occurrences in early Australian colonial history. So following on from Indigenous culture, if the expansion west did not occur, the colony of Sydney would have been abandoned. And Dr. Siobhan Lavelle, probably the authority on the subject, referred to the crossing of the Blue Mountains as the emergence of a national consciousness. So I hope all politicians would be on that page about the national significance of the crossing of the Blue Mountains. But I welcome either the government or the opposition to support the request for funding for a Blue Mountains Museum. And I think that would be a wonderful lasting legacy. And the bicentenary goes for 3 years, which is fortunate for us, not fortunate for candidates or members, because you can't talk about a financial year not being suitable because there's another 2 following it.
And just to clarify, yes, Randall absolutely did come to us. What, from our perspective, was very late in the piece. It had missed all those rounds.
Sure, and I just wanted to clarify that those letters were written to both parties at the same time. I'd just like to ask, on behalf of the tourism industry, with 45% of total tourism expenditure in Australia taking place in regional Australia, would each of the candidates commit personally to advocating for at least 45% of federal tourism funding to be made available to regional tourism in Australia?
Happy to advocate for that without question.
What you missed me saying earlier is that I don't think we should just be looking at the specific funds that are for tourism. I think we need to be looking at the investments that are made in the infrastructure as well, because I was saying they're the key to people getting here and when they come here to being able to enhance their experience. So I'll talk you through what I said earlier. But in that way, I think we probably superseded that sort of percentage with the sorts of investments that have been made in terms of road, civic centres, cultural centre, NBN, all those sorts of things that actually make it a fantastic holistic experience for people. Plus, I think the environmental investments that we make and the national park funding, without that, this area doesn't have the draw card that it must maintain.
Thank you, Randall. I think we're about out of time. Our guests have to go. So would you please put your hands together? Take a 5-minute recess and then we'll